The war is finally over. Or is it? The ceremony was going to happen in Switzerland, but was called off the morning of. Does this mean that the peace treaty is nullified? Are we going to really give Iran $300 billion? Are we giving up any kind of enforcement on Iran nuclear weapons whatsoever? You may be wondering if this even counts as the end of the war. The answer to all those questions is a resounding maybe. The devil's really in the details. Many have given basic rundowns on this memorandum of understanding, but we need to dive deep into the details of this memorandum of understanding. But very few have done that, especially with the details that will affect the average everyday person. And that's something I want to correct today. Hello, I'm Jeff, your host for today, and welcome to Casualities. And today we'll be discussing every single point of the Memorandum of Understanding, reading each line and breaking down what they actually mean, putting everything into understandable context that can help us see how the Middle East is being reshaped by this deal. There's a lot of reading here, so I do hope you like B-roll. However, the information will be very helpful to see how this conflict is actually concluding. But without further ado, let's get right into the details. Memorandum of Understanding. Before we can even get into the details of the Memorandum of Understanding, we need to know exactly what this is. So the U.S.-Israeli conflict with Iran has essentially been in a ceasefire since April 8th. Despite the countless violations and attacks done by practically every party to the conflict since, many as recently as earlier this week, a memorandum of understanding usually accompanies a ceasefire so the framework for peace talks and issues to be covered are known. However, many of these violations happened because this memo, shorthand for memorandum, wasn't in place. Hopefully, with this document here, the actual fighting stops. This deal seems to have been in place for nearly a week now. However, due to back and forth attacks between Iran, insert Arab or Israeli flag here, it had to be delayed until Iran had completed its retaliation. Now, this isn't a peace treaty. However, a MOU is almost always the predecessor to one. This helps build a legal framework and foundation on which the peace treaties are enforced. That framework is key to our discussion today. And it should be mentioned that even though the Strait of Hormuz is still being said to be closed, it is actually understood that the talks will happen this upcoming Sunday, June 21st, and that Iran and the United States are still going to sit down and try to enforce this with the hopes that Hezbollah and Israel will stop fighting each other. Point 1. The United States of America and the Islamic Republic of Iran and their allies in the current war are signing this MOU to declare the immediate and permanent termination of military operations on all fronts, including Lebanon, and undertake from now on not to initiate any war or any military operation against each other, and to refrain from the threat or use of force against each other, ensuring the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Lebanon. The final deal will confirm the permanent termination of the war on all fronts, including in Lebanon, and other provisions of this paragraph. So, this part is very obviously trying to tie the fighting in Lebanon to the war with Iran, protecting Iran's biggest and most loyal proxy, Hezbollah. Israel has viewed Hezbollah as its most immediate threat. In fact, after the October 7th attacks, Israel called up over 300,000 reservists to arms. Only about 30,000 would be in Gaza at any one time, the conflict that got the most coverage, while over 150,000 will remain near the Lebanese border facing Hezbollah positions, which creates an interesting legal dilemma. As you may have noticed, this document is mentioning Lebanon. Israel technically isn't fighting the state of Lebanon. They are fighting a group inside Lebanon, Hezbollah. And it should be mentioned in a ceasefire from last year, Hezbollah agreed to surrender its arms and let the Lebanese army take control of the south. And to add on top of this, most of the world still views the Lebanese state as the one ruled by the president and prime minister, not Hezbollah. Despite not liking Israel, the democratically elected Lebanese government wants Hezbollah completely removed, which is why they haven't claimed Israel has violated their sovereignty, leading to the legal claim that this point is pretty much moot in relation to this war since Israel is only directly fighting Hezbollah, which will probably be the actual issue to undo this whole thing since Iran only recognizes Hezbollah as the leaders of Lebanon. The meeting in Switzerland was scrapped, Now it looks like it's actually been postponed because of further strikes on Hezbollah by the Israelis. And it should be mentioned earlier this week that there were strikes by Hezbollah into Israel that killed 4 IDF soldiers, and Israel responded by bombing Beirut. And this back and forth has happened. 2 days ago, 2 Israelis were killed, and Israel has responded in kind with the retaliations, killing 20 Lebanese. And it should also be mentioned that a lot of this fighting is something that could also be prodded by Iran to be able to kick out the can on these talks and push it further and further with hopes of getting a better and better deal. So all this needs to be understood in this context, also with Israel saying that we are not actually fighting the Lebanese. There's no war in Lebanon because there's no war in Bosnia, and we don't believe we're actually fighting the Lebanese. It's a really complex, complicated legal issue that both sides are going to say they are adhering to, but will probably be the big thing that actually undoes everything if this does fall apart. I promise not every point will be as long. Point 2. The United States of America and the Islamic Republic of Iran undertake to respect each other's sovereignty and territorial integrity and to refrain from interfering in each other's internal affairs. So this is pretty straightforward for both sides. However, its lack of mention for Arab states gives both the United States and Iran cover to deny any requests of aid when Iranian proxies operate in those countries. Also, this is a way for both sides to have plausible deniability in case Iran continues to develop and use its Haya, a terrorist network in Europe, which has already carried out over a dozen low-level attacks inside the continent, mainly aimed at Jewish citizens of those countries. This lets America divorce itself more from European defense since Iranian attacks aren't eligible for retaliation. This also means spying and other things like that are not allowed, and the United States cannot support any rebels that rise up in Iran. Point 3. The United States of America and the Islamic Republic of Iran commit to negotiating and achieving the final deal in maximum 60 days, extendable with mutual consent. Yeah, they're probably going to have to extend this one, but there's a hope that they don't. So this is giving both parties 60 days to make a permanent deal. And these treaties historically usually take about 18 months to actually be fully agreed upon. This seems very rushed, although there is a good reason to have it be rushed. And if these discussions go beyond this range, the deal would go beyond Trump's presidential war powers and could require congressional approval. So to sidestep that whole process, they want to get it done within 60 days so it doesn't have to pass Congress. Point 4. Immediately upon the signing of this MOU, the United States of America will begin the removal of its naval blockade and any disturbances or impediments against the Islamic Republic of Iran, and will fully end the naval blockade within 30 days. During this period, the traffic of vessels will be in proportion to the numbers of pre-war traffic being restored by the Islamic Republic of Iran. The United States of America further undertakes to remove its forces from the proximity of the Islamic Republic of Iran within 30 days after the final deal. This can essentially be broken down as more brownie points thing for Iran to its citizens, saying they had the Americans withdraw. However, this is very vague. Many of the ships doing the blockade will go back to their home bases across the world. The Marine Expeditionary Units will go back to their bases in Japan and California, respectively. There's no indication that the U.S. Fifth Fleet in Bahrain or the Combined Air Operations Center in Qatar or the dozens of little bases across the Middle East will actually be closed down. It seems like that they will just draw down the forces because these ships and forces are just needed elsewhere and they're just going to go back home. That is going to be the plan, and it looks like brownie points for the Iranians at the end of the day. Point 5. Upon the signing of this MOU, the Islamic Republic of Iran will make arrangements using its best efforts for the safe passage of commercial vessels with no charge for 60 days only from the Persian Gulf to the Sea of Oman and vice versa. The traffic of commercial vessels will immediately start, and considering the need for removing the technical and military obstacles, and demining by the Islamic Republic of Iran will be instated within 30 days. The Islamic Republic of Iran will conduct dialogue with the Sultanate of Oman to define the future administration and maritime services in the Strait of Hormuz in discussion with other Persian Gulf littoral states in line with the application of international law and sovereign rights. So this really can be broken down into 2 parts. First, it does guarantee that no toll will be charged to any ship leaving the Gulf right now. But again, that's only for 60 days. This gives enough time for ships trapped in the Gulf to get insurance and leave immediately. Also being enough time for Iran to deactivate all its mines in the strait. The second part is more interesting, because after 60 days, Iran can enter into an agreement with Oman to start charging tolls through the strait. Iran would need Oman's cooperation because they can just go through Omani waters if Iran starts charging tolls. And this toll would also upend nearly 81 years of precedent set by the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, which demands all natural waterways have free passage, a founding principle of the United Nations. Abandoning the standard could put the world's straits and coastlines in the crosshairs of larger nations like the US, China, Russia, creating spheres of influence that make nations choose between aligning with one side or experiencing even more dramatic price rises. This principle has ironically been the hallmark of American foreign policy and has been what generates the most goodwill towards the US military. I believe the freedom of movement throughout the world seas is one of the greatest achievements in human advancement. Leaving room for this precedent to be broken is something we all should take a great deal of interest in. I don't believe Trump personally wants the tolls. However, his desire to have the war end is greater. And we need to see if these same principles and protocols that are broken are used in places like the Panama Canal or the Malacca Straits to assert American interests. Places that I can guarantee you several items in your home have passed through to get to your doorstep. This is something that we need to watch with great interest as time goes on. Point 6. The United States of America undertakes with regional partners to develop a definitive, mutual agreed upon plan with at least $300 billion for the reconstruction and economic development of the Islamic Republic of Iran. The mechanisms for the implementation of this plan will be finalized as part of the final deal within 60 days. All required licenses, waivers, and permissions needed for the relevant financial transactions will be granted by the United States of America. So, this is the big talk of the town, the big kahuna. And most people don't understand what is actually going on here. And you can see by this Reuters article, actually talks about how half of the $300 billion has been committed. Does this mean we've already given them $150 billion in taxpayer money while the war is going on? No. This isn't coming from taxpayer dollars at all. Despite everyone calling these reparations, it shouldn't be viewed as that. Instead, it is going to be funds gathered from American, Arab, and Far East Asian companies. They'll convert all the funds into American dollars and will be used as direct investments, credit lines, and loans for Iran to use. This section has to be used in tandem with sanctions relief that we'll talk about in just a minute, because these funds are all conditional on Iran abiding by their nuclear and military requirements in this document. Since the inception of the Islamic Revolution in 1979, Iran has been cut off from the world economically. In 1979, many thought that they would be able to rapidly grow and rival Japan by the 90s. However, they have had nothing but minuscule growth after the world sanctioned them to death. This amount of investment is roughly 75% of Iran's GDP and will give them access to trade because they will have a huge amount of American dollars in their reserves. A large part of the thinking here for Trump is that we can't slap more sanctions on Iran. They've essentially are cut off from everyone that wants to actually participate in the sanctions, meaning that the stick has been used to its full extent. We need more carrots now. And if Iran is able to rebuild itself on the back of American investment, getting to the point that they're enjoying a fairly comfortable lifestyle, they will be more amenable to demands to change. If they refuse, well, the investment rug will be pulled and the Iranians will be pouring in with no one to blame but their leadership, creating a situation where regime change feels inevitable. As a side note though, this is the basis for a lot of Trump's thinking on how trade and foreign direct investment should work, which is why you see these multi-billion-dollar deals with our adversaries pop up whenever he meets with them. He wants more carrots because the American stick has become more dull over the last 30 years. He doesn't see us having any chance of actually enforcing more sanctions, so he wants to be able to give the stick strategy or a carrot strategy the try. For Iran's thinking, they see a way to be able to fast-track recovery while helping their own carrot and stick scenario. If Iran paid for the reconstruction, it'd take years and resources that their quasi-centrally planned economy would struggle to be able to regulate and build. With private investment and funds, they can have their infrastructure bounce back while their domestic funds can focus on rebuilding their stockpiles and proxies. This also helps them gain a way to control the populace. They have been using the stick pretty hard on their people over the last decade. Protests are common. In fact, if you remember in January, in roughly 2 days, they are estimated to have killed roughly 36,000 protesters, something growing more common in the Islamic Republic. However, with the investments coming in, They can direct those investments into their own national trust funds called bonyads, giving them the ability to pick and support the preferred companies. And we need to see if there's any provisions in the final deal that try to stop this. However, the bonyads control roughly a quarter of the economy and provide all the basic amenities in the country along with all the paramilitaries. So the companies they pick are the ones that always win out at the end of the day. If the 5 million people or so connected to the bonyads are able to enjoy a high standard of living, then they have a very good reason to enforce the regime's rule when the next protests break out, offering the carrot to some and the stick to the other 85 million or so Iranians. Iran almost certainly has to utilize this kind of structure for the funding because wealthier citizens overall, because if overall all their citizens become wealthier, they'll become used to these comforts and it would be impossible to satiate if the investment just disappeared overnight. Still, Iran may just take a portion of the funds, rebuild, and just shrug when they go back and build ballistic missiles with them, stating that they are a faithful people and their theocracy will survive without decadent Western support. After all, they are so used to the stick that it's practically a part of their lifestyle now. There's little doubt that Iran can show that they can tough through years of more sanctions if it comes to it. Point 7. The United States of America undertakes to terminate all types of sanctions against the Islamic Republic of Iran, including the United Nations Security Council resolutions, IAEA Board of Governor resolutions, and all unilateral U.S. sanctions, primary and secondary, and agreed upon schedule as part of the final deal. The Islamic Republic of Iran and the United States of America acknowledge the critical importance of the sanctions termination issue above mentioned, and express their intentions to immediately address these issues in the negotiations in order to achieve mutual agreement on them. That's a lot of words there, man. And this is another big fish to deal with. This is essentially for the previous point talking about the investment. Historically, to get things done with Iran, the U.S. would promise to give them carrots, sanction relief, if they stopped the progress on their nuclear program. However, when specific sanctions were dropped, nothing would really happen, mainly because the number of sanctions on Iran are huge and complex. With how hard it is to meet the United Nations Security Council sanctions as well as American and local legal codes necessary to get business done in Iran, most just don't bother to invest in Iran. The term for this phenomenon is actually called sanction over compliance, because without the stick, sanctions relief, all the investment would just sit in corporate accounts going nowhere. This doesn't really affect trade with Russia, China, or Pakistan since they don't really respect the sanctions anyway. But with most of the free democrat capitalist Western world, this is incredibly important. And on a final note on this, since any binding United Nations resolutions, read sanctions, that actually get enforced have to pass through the United Nations Security Council, this is basically asking the United States, United Kingdom, and France to ignore UN institutions and does a lot to hurt their credibility on the world stage. Point 8. The Islamic Republic of Iran reaffirms that it shall not procure or develop nuclear weapons. The United States of America and the Islamic Republic of Iran have agreed to resolve the disposition of stockpiled enriched materials pursuant to a mechanism that will be mutually agreed upon in accordance with the schedule mentioned in paragraph 7. With the minimum methodology to be down blended on site under the supervision of the IAEA, the two parties also agreed to discuss the issue of enrichment and other mutually agreed matters related to the Islamic Republic of Iran's nuclear needs. Based on the satisfactory framework being agreed upon in the final deal will confirm the provisions of this paragraph. The United States of America and the Islamic Republic of Iran acknowledge the critical importance of the nuclear issues above mentioned. They expressed their intention to immediately address these issues in negotiations in order to achieve mutual agreement on them. That's a lot of words. Yeah, we can pretty much assume that any kind of restrictions that will be put here are going to be nothing more than really a pinky promise. With the previous 2 points in the MOU, they went into effect immediately, whereas this will be negotiated upon in the future, which is benefit to Iran. For the previous 2 points, this is benefit to America. It won't go into effect until after the final treaty. It is expected to be resolved in the next 60 days. It's hard to imagine a world where they are able to implement actual restrictions. The JCPOA, Obama's nuclear treaty, took 2 years and had a tiered sanction relief for different levels of compliance within the Iranian regime, something Trump called weak and ineffective. However, since all the cards are given to Iran before the first details can even be cemented, leaving no leverage for the United States to use in the foreseeable negotiations in the future. This just makes it impossible to believe that an actual strong enforcement mechanism will be utilized and Iran will agree to it. If they have everything they want before we even get to negotiations, how can we enforce it? Point 9. Point 9. Pending the final deal, the United States of America and the Islamic Republic of Iran agree to maintain the status quo. The Islamic Republic of Iran will maintain the current status quo of its nuclear program. The United States of America will not impose any new sanctions and will not deploy additional forces in the region. This is just the status quo being the status quo. Not a ton to see here, just asking that they don't escalate, and if they do escalate, this deal is essentially off the table. No shocks. Point 10. The United States of America undertakes that immediately upon the signing of this MOU and until the termination of sanctions, the United States Department of Treasury will issue waivers for the export of Iranian crude oil, petroleum products and derivatives, and all associated services, including banking transactions, insurance, transportation, etc. Trump probably demanded this so that oil prices would fall immediately. This will also give Iran a chance to see how the transfer of funds and sanctions reliefs work before they really get into the final details of the deal, giving them a chance to iron out anything that Iran doesn't particularly like. And again, this hopefully will stabilize international markets. Point 11. The United States of America undertakes to make fully available for use the frozen or restricted funds and assets of the Islamic Republic of Iran upon the implementation of this MOU. The United States of America and the Islamic Republic of Iran will mutually agree on the procedures related to the release of these funds during negotiations. Such funds, whether retained in the original account or transferred, shall be made fully usable for payment to any ultimate beneficiary designated by the Central Bank of the Islamic Republic of Iran. The United States of America undertakes to issue all necessary licenses and authorizations accordingly. So this essentially can be viewed as the down payment for the MOU and further talks. This releases roughly $24 billion in immediate funds to Iran, giving them liquid cash to start rebuilding immediately. And these funds could be given to anyone. Even the Iranian military in the United States would have to acquiesce and give it to them. Point 12. The United States of America and the Islamic Republic of Iran agree that an executive mechanism will be established to monitor the successful implementation of this MOU and the future compliance of the final deal. Just stating that there will be a body to oversee this, likely one formed in the UN, and will probably be ineffective within about a year. But you know what? Government employees will get paid, and we know about 100 people will make $200,000 a year doing nothing. It's a win-win. Point 13. After signing this MOU and subject to the beginning of the implementation of paragraphs 1, 4, 5, 10, and 11 of this MOU, in the continuing implementations of these measures, the United States of America and the Islamic Republic of Iran will start negotiations regarding the final deal exclusively on the other paragraphs. This is stating that once these points have begun, this will allow the final treaty to be crafted. Point 14. The final deal will be endorsed by a binding United Nations Security Council resolution. In short, the UN will make this official, making this legitimately recognized by the world. So we covered a lot there. That was a lot of details. That was something that I really wanted to be able to go through because no one's actually going over the in-depth details. But what we can really say is it's very clear and obvious. Iran are the victors. These terms have shown that Iran not only went through this war ready, because this was a war they were expecting for 40 years, but they actually came out as the victors because they have not only held their ground and survived, they actually now come out with a strategic initiative because all these points read as demands from Iran and concessions from the United States. That only happens if Iran is the victor and we are the ones essentially surrendering and losing. So this can be said that Iran views this as a total victory. This is something where there's hard to really find any positives for the United States, and Iran will not only be able to come out of this looking stronger, they'll most likely be heavily rebuilt, have a lot more influence and being able to bully their neighbors, and they will rebuild their proxies in Yemen, in Iraq, in Lebanon, in Gaza, and they could probably push and expand their networks to other places like Egypt, Turkey, Pakistan, and they may even be able to have a serious threat in Europe. This is something that we have to understand. The IRGC have consolidated all their power. The moderates that have helped limit the IRGC, those religious fanatics that run Iran, have essentially forced any and all reasonable word out. The president Pezeshkian, who is not exactly the most moderate person in the world when it comes to Iranian politics, has threatened to resign. It seems like Khalibaf, the prime minister, has also threatened to resign, but that is just genuinely not being accepted by the IRGC, and they're forcing them to be puppets in power to be able to negotiate with the United States. Overall, the Iranians do appear to be the complete and total victors of this. On the flip side, this is probably one of the United States' worst strategic disasters since the Vietnam War. And depending on how it plays out, this could be worse than the Vietnam War. Vietnam was very rough for the United States, and it was viewed as a terrible defeat. But overall, in the grand scheme of things, it may not have played that huge of an effect, because as soon as we left, China invaded a few years later, and Vietnam did not play that important of a role on the world stage and became one of the poorest countries in the world. This war with Iran may have effectively started pushing the United States out of the region of the Middle East, and has really dented a lot of our relationships with our allies, with a lot of our adversaries, and could possibly dent the American image overall throughout the world. I can't say it has dented the image. The United States military has performed flawlessly in this. The bombing campaign was a tactical success. Every single turn you see, the United States military performed capable and dutifully, where it was able to execute at the top and pinnacle of performance. They were able to submarine and torpedo Iranian ships. Whenever our pilots and flyers got shot down, they were able to be recovered and brought back home. But still, at the end of the day, the strategic strategy just totally and completely failed to be able to implement any of the war goals. In fact, the war goals started out as us removing Iran's proxy network, their nuclear capabilities, their ballistic missiles, and their Navy. The only one that's really been affected is the Navy, and they can rebuild that with the funds we're going to give them from these private companies. The ballistic missiles, we've actually said that Iran should use those to defend themselves. The nuclear program is going to be continuing to exist, and is going to remain at its status quo. With IRGC in power, they're probably going to expand that. And the proxies look ready to be able to bring more devastation and destruction upon the world. For the United States, this was a total mistake. If you look at our alliance with Israel, which is one of the key things that forced us to go to war in the first place, I have a video on that if you want to look at that. And I have a video on that if you like to look at that. Is put a wedge between the United States and Israel. Many would say that's a good thing. Some would say that that's a terrible thing. But at the end of the day, for a political survivor like Netanyahu, this is a total disaster. With elections coming up in October in Israel, his very survival is on the line. And I don't just mean politically, because if he loses power, Netanyahu will most likely sit in a jail in Israel for corruption, or a jail in the Netherlands for war crimes. At the end of the day, he is going to do whatever it takes, and that's most likely the way that this deal comes to an end. And Israel's reputation on the world stage, which has been harshly hurt over the last couple of decades, has now been utterly destroyed, and the United States was their only friend. Now it looks like Israel is now alone in the world, with Trump abandoning Netanyahu. And now it seems like there's going to be some rifts with Netanyahu and Trump's administration that will refuse to work together in the future for however long both their terms will last. But the casualties of it all is that this is a total mistake that happened. And now we have to reap the consequences. I will produce in some time a total after action report talking about what happened during the war and giving an overall evaluation. However, I want to give some space for that because, again, this is not the peace treaty. Everything can fall apart. I want to be a little bit more sure that we are done with the fighting before I actually make that video. But until we get to that time, and until other things happen, all we can hope for is peace. But until that time, bye for now.